Hey, buddy, watch this.
Hello, Regis Kilbin is the name, and Hearthstone is the game, and this is part 4 of my Whispers of the Old Gods card review. Today I've got 6 new cards that we're going to discuss and see if we can get an idea towards their competitive viability. Starting off with another new Forbidden card. Now this set of cards that seems to be getting the Forbidden label all has a similar mechanic in that it's a 0 mana spell, but it makes you spend all of your remaining mana, and then based on that, the effect will change. In particular with Forbidden Healing, this Paladin card, you can spend all your mana and you restore twice that much health. So that means if you spend 10 mana, you're healing your hero for 20 health. But it does take your entire turn. More likely, this is the kind of card you're going to slot in with spare mana near the end of the game. Say you've spent like 6 mana playing, a Mysterious Challenger, but you have 4 mana remaining. You can play Forbidden Healing and heal for 8 as well. So it's kind of like an antique heal bot without the body, right? So depending on your needs, any point in the game, you can slot this in for your spare mana, heal a little bit, which is very nice because even on like turn 4, if you play a 3-drop, healing for 2 is not particularly great, but sometimes it might make the difference between staying alive long enough to stabilize and not. So anytime you even have 2 or 3 spare mana, the value on this really starts to crank up. Of course, with 1 mana, it's not that efficient, but 4, 5, 6 mana, it's a very big heal that can buy you a lot of time, particularly in a class like Paladin that does have many ways to stabilize in the late game behind taunts like Tyrion and various other defensive mechanisms that Paladin has access to. All that said, since this card doesn't have a body attached, it's never going to be as powerful of a turn as like Reno Jackson, for instance, which could theoretically heal you for 29 and deposit a 4/6 body. But the trade-off there is that this is flexible, so it's always going to be playable to some extent. Other than if you have 0 mana remaining, I guess you'd heal for double 0, which is still 0. Math lesson. But it has some flexibility. I don't think it's going to be a strong card or a key card in Paladin necessarily, but I wouldn't be surprised to see it find its way into various kinds of control-style decks. Moving on to a new Priest card. Not only a Priest card, but actually a legendary card as well. It is the 6-mana Herald Volazj. That's going to be a mouthful to say every time. I'm calling this card Herald by default, and not in the sense of one who heralds, but in the sense of the old-fashioned name Herald. So this is my good old buddy Herald, the 6-mana 5/5 Priest, legendary with lots of tentacles. This is a pretty cool card. I think it's being underrated by the community a little bit. I think it could be a very strong card as well. Not only is it a 6-mana 5/5, which is really your key stat bundle that you want at 6 mana. Most of the good 6 mana cards historically have been 5/5s. It also has this neat battle cry. Summon a 1/1 copy of each of your other minions. So that means, for instance, if you have a Sylvanas Windrunner on the board, you play Herald, it's going to give you a 1/1 Sylvanas. So exactly the same as Sylvanas for the Death Rattle and the effects, but just instead of a 5/5, it's a 1/1. You might say, who cares about a bunch of 1/1s? Those aren't very meaningful. And I would introduce you to a fellow named Dr. Boom, who has a 7/7, wasn't very exciting, but it was his pair of 1/1 buddies that made him so good. So I like that this card can really just pack insane amounts of value onto the board. So if you got that Sylvanas out there, you're getting 2 Sylvanases, which is just crazy. Even as a 1/1, she's even better, perhaps, because she's so easy to die and trigger that effect. But it's great for taunts as well. Copying taunts, even as a 1/1, still means that the opponent has to dedicate some resources to that body to get through the taunt. Priest has a lot of cards with effects, like Death Rattle effects, deal damage when something happened effects. You could basically get like 2 Akanai Soul Priests for free, right? You could double some Zombie Chows and pull some shenanigans there, but Zombie Chow's going away with Standard, but you get the idea. There's all kinds of different ways with both Priest cards and neutral cards to get value here. Now, the downside, of course, is that if you already have that Sylvanas on board, if you already have a couple minions to benefit, that means you're already ahead in the game. So a lot of people would describe our good old buddy Herald as a win more card, which means, yeah, his effect's really cool, but it's only good if you're already winning. And if you're already winning as priest, then the game is over, because most priests are so late game that they dominate in the late game regardless of what's going to happen. So you might say, who cares about Herald? Why does he matter? And that's a valid argument, but sometimes win more cards to me are really more like secure the win cards. They help you finish off games and make sure that you have a truly unassailable position and that you really can't lose. But still, at 6 mana, Herald Volazj has some pretty cool late game kind of combo potentials. Basically, you could play him alongside anything that's 4 mana or less and get an instant double value out of it. So there may not be a ton of like high impact 4 mana cards, but let's just go back to our old buddy Piloted Shredder, for instance. If you play Herald alongside a Piloted Shredder, not only are you getting an awesome board from a 5/5 and a Piloted Shredder, you're also getting an extra 1/1 that has a Death Rattle effect, summon a 2 mana minion, which is pretty good, right? That's still more than 2 mana in extra value. So Piloted Shredder might be going away with standard format, of course, but I'm assuming there will be other cards at the 2, 3, 4 mana spot that give you some instant value off of Herald. Plus, with priest shenanigans keeping minions alive and gaining tempo, I think that there are times where this will be played with a couple minions on the board where you're still not exactly winning the game, and Herald will essentially give you the value you need to pull ahead. So I think a lot of people are just limiting Herald to a win more card that won't see play. But I wouldn't be surprised. This guy just has so much raw power and potential that who really knows what he could do in the future. So I'm holding out hope for our friend Herald. I think it's a great design, really fun art, and I like legendary cards a lot, so I'm hopeful for this one. Moving on to what I guess is actually the Piloted Shredder's planned replacement so far, in a sense. This is the 4 mana neutral card, the Infested Tauren. It is a 2/3 body with taunt and a death rattle that summons a 2/2 slime. So this is kind of a defensive Piloted Shredder with a guaranteed death rattle, and it has been confirmed that the slime that this summons does not have taunt. It's not like Sludge Belcher, for instance. So the second half of this is really just a body. So you're getting 4/5 in stats split across 2 minions for this guy, the first half of which has taunt. I think this minion's a cool idea. It kind of removes the variance from Piloted Shredder, whereas sometimes, with Piloted Shredder, you'd get the Middle House Mana Storm on the second half, and it would be amazing. And other times you'd get, like, the Captain's Parrot, and it would be awful. But this one makes it consistent every time. You're always going to get a 2/2, which is nice second half value behind the Death Rattle. The problem is that the 2/2 itself will be pretty low impact. It doesn't have taunt, it doesn't have any effects, it can't charge, it doesn't do anything exciting like a lot of the Piloted Shredder drop-offs could do. The other problem is that 2/3 taunt, while it's nice to have taunt, it doesn't do a lot. But I think the design idea for this card was that force people to kill the Infested Tauren to guarantee the second half of the value. Whereas Piloted Shredder, you could kind of just leave it on the board and never touch it to summon the second half. This one kind of encourages that play mechanic where you're kind of forcing your opponent to deal with it so that you get all the value from this 4-drop. The problem is, at its best, it's still just kind of Sinjin Shieldmaster / Chillwind Yeti. It's 4/5 in stats. It's like kind of like a 3/5 Sinjin with taunt. It's not rocking anyone's world, and the 2 attack with taunt usually means that they'll be able to kill it for free without trading anything into it. So I think this card, while it's kind of fun and a cool design, and it lives in a neat space, I think the raw stats leave it in a pretty awkward spot where it doesn't really fit as a defensive card. It's not really like a board presence card like Piloted Shredder was, and it doesn't have the threatening attacks to make it really impact the board immediately. So I think Infested Tauren is just too awkward to ever actually see a lot of play. Moving on, another neutral minion. This one's pretty fun and I think actually pretty good. It's the 1-mana Tentacle of N'Zoth. It is a 1/1 minion, 1-mana 1/1 with the Death Rattle. Deal 1 damage to all minions. So I think for a couple different classes, this one could see play. It actually has some defensive capabilities because its Death Rattle is a very miniature board clear. Could kill a lot of Silverhand Recruits or Imps, which is nice against a couple classes in particular, which tend to run pretty aggressive decks with lots of Silverhand Recruits and Imps. But it also has implications for classes that like to damage their own minions, particularly Warrior, in cards like Grim Patron. Warrior is losing a few different tools that have whirlwind effects, particularly Unstable Ghoul and Death Spite. So it looks like Blizzard's already giving them a replacement of sorts. This one's a little harder to control because it is a Death Rattle effect, so you'll have to kill it yourself. But Warrior has so many different ways to do that. They could just whirlwind into it for the double whirlwind effect. They have all kinds of different 1 damage ping effects that impact their own minions. So that won't really be a limitation other than perhaps mana or card resources, but still just giving them that tool. Plus, I think this could just kind of be a tech card against all those 1/1 classes. It's got solid value on that Death Rattle. So I wouldn't be surprised to see Tentacle of N'Zoth played in a variety of different decks. I think it's a really nice little card that Blizzard put together, which you don't often say about 1-drops all that much, but it's an impactful 1-drop, which is a good and fresh thing to see. Moving on to a 10-mana spell. What? There's only a couple of those. This one's called Doom, and that's you'll note that's all capitalized. That's not the normal stylization for Hearthstone. Doom with an exclamation mark. And it's a Warlock card. 10-mana spell. Destroy all minions. Draw a card for each. So this is like Twisting Nether, which is an 8-mana destroy all minions. But this one has a 2-cost benefit to it, apparently, which is that you draw a card for each. Which is just a ridiculously powerful effect, right? If there's 14 minions on board, you could draw 14 cards. That would not be good, typically. But really, the goal here is if there's like 3 minions on your enemy's side of the board, you can kill them all and refill your hand a little bit. I think that's a cool design in theory, but in practice, I feel like this card is never going to do what you want it to do, because typically, if you're a Warlock who's playing to turn 10, that means you're a control, slow-style Warlock who has been building card resources all game already with your hero power, as a control-style Warlock is wont to do. And that probably means that the game is already stretching towards fatigue a little bit, and most of the time you're going to be hitting fatigue sooner than your opponent just because you've been drawing cards really without regard for safety all game long to keep your resources up, as you should. And a card like this, while it's a great board clear, it basically means you're going to be drawing 3, 4, 5 cards into fatigue even sooner. And the problem with having lots of cards in the late game is that usually they're higher cost cards. They're 5 mana, 7 mana, 8 mana. And you can't play them all at one turn for a big advantage. You still kind of have to parse them out turn over turn. You can't just dump your hand onto the board. So having 8 cards is not necessarily better than 5, other than having more choices, which is the real goal in a control style matchup, is having the perfect answer at the perfect time. It's not about like a brute force attack. It's about precision strikes. And this card kind of supports that brute force mentality. Like, reload the hand, keep dumping it on the board. The problem is, if your deck is built with 2 mana, 3 mana, 4 mana cards, it's a lot less likely that you'll actually survive to turn 10, survive into those late game control style matchups, because you need the meat and the raw value that the 5+ mana cards have. So again, this is a card that to me lives in an awkward space. It encourages one thing that actually reinforces another. So I don't think Doom is ever going to see a lot of play. Perhaps decks with like low-cost charge effects and lots of card draw could somehow make value out of this, but I just don't see it right now. Let's see what the rest of the Whispers of the Old God set has to offer, and maybe Doom will be much better. And then finally, our last card, I believe. Yeah, last card is Hallazeal the Ascended. Thanks to Kriparian for revealing this card. This is a Shaman card, 5 mana, legendary minion, and it's actually just outright amazing. I think this is far and away the best card that has been revealed in the Whispers of the Old Gods set so far. Hallazeal the Ascended, 5 mana, a 4/6 body, which is awesome. Very sturdy, good stat allocation. 4 attack doesn't necessarily trade into everything at that kind of magic 5 health number, but it also has 6 health, so it lives to that stuff as well, right? And when you have a card with a very powerful active effect like this one that's consistent over turns, you'd rather it be able to survive than make trades. If it was a 5/5 and it cleanly traded into everything, it might be less likely to live. But as a 4/6, it has a slightly higher chance to actually live through the turn in that mid-game, which is nice because its effect is fantastic. Whenever your spells deal damage, restore that much health to your hero. Now, we've all probably played against aggro shamans who have lots and lots and lots of damage spells, lightning bolts and crackles, and lava bursts and lava shocks, all that stuff. Shaman has a lot of ways to do damage with spells, and Shaman has always historically lacked good ways to heal themselves. Now, they've picked up some tools, of course, throughout time, but the more healing tools Shaman has, the more likely and more able they are to play control-style matchups. And with cards like Hex in their kit, control has actually always fit Shaman pretty well. It's just they haven't had the right cards and the right pieces to make it extremely viable. Well, Hallazeal the Ascended is the exact kind of card that can do that. Because basically you're not punished too hard for putting those lightning bolts and those crackles in your deck. Suddenly, they're not just damage spells, you're extracting extra value out of them. And that's good for making a bad 1-mana card that's weak as far as raw value is concerned. Taking that 1 mana, basically creating 3 or 4 or 5 manas worth of value out of it. And that's what Hallazeal the Ascended does. You play this late in the game, you have a couple damage spells in hand, you probably use them to clear minions to give yourself some board space and advantage. You're also healing up your face, you're depositing a big minion onto the board. Everything is dandy. Now, also note that this doesn't say whenever your single target spells deal damage, it says whenever your spells deal damage. So that means Lightning Storm, that's a spell, and it does damage. If they have 7 3 health minions on the board, and you kill all of them with your Lightning Storm, guess what? You're healing for 21 health. That's crazy. That's Reno style. Reno style heals. Of course, Elemental Destruction, a handful of other cards, Forked Lightning. Some crazy stuff can be done with Hallazeal the Ascended. There are so many different ways to just extract lots of value out of this card, and you don't even really feel all that bad playing it on turn 5. It's a 4/6, so it's like all upside. It's unbelievable to see a Shaman card that doesn't have some crazy penalizing overload or some downside, awkward stats. There's just nothing wrong with Hallazeal the Ascended, and it looks like any mid-range or control-style Shaman deck is going to find a way to fit this card in its list to me. Fantastic Whispers of the Old God card. Alright, so that wraps it up for my part 4 of the review of the Whispers of the Old Gods cards. If you have any questions about these cards or want to chat about them, please do leave a comment. Thanks so much for watching. And until next time with part 5, game on.